am a lawyer, but I am not necessarily your lawyer. The materials discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be deemed legal advice. If you have a specific legal question according to your circumstances, then I encourage you to speak with an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. Welcome back to another edition of Ag Law Today. We've got two very special guests back in the house. We're talking about personal injury considerations for farmers and ranchers. So Josh and Zach, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Carrie. Appreciate you having us.
So
Thank you very much, Carrie.
Why don't the two of you reintroduce yourself to our listeners? Tell us who you are, where you are, and what you do. Starting with you, Josh.
I'm Josh Rorscheib. I'm a personal injury lawyer in Central Illinois. I'm with a law firm called Boland Robinson and Ellis. We have 4 offices throughout Central Illinois, and I'll turn it over to my partner, Zach.
I'm Zach Anderson. I'm also a partner at Boland Robinson and Ellis Bree Law. My practice is focused on personal injury as well as mass torts and class actions, which typically involve product liability. I am also a proud new dad, so if I look tired, I apologize. I had another rough night last night, so I'm kind of running on fumes.
I think all three of us can now relate to how that feels. So congratulations, Zach. So I'm curious, what led you guys to want to, A, go to law school, and then B, become a personal injury attorney? Why don't we start with you, Zach?
Well, I'm not entirely sure why I went to law school. I know that I really enjoyed the law, and so I kind of just made the decision to attend law school at the University of Illinois. My second summer of law school, one of my summers in law school, I went to Kansas for a trial, and it was a very large class action case, and I was there with a bunch of plaintiffs' attorneys. And I watched the trial. I didn't really know all of what was going on, but at the end of the trial, there was a successful verdict for the plaintiffs. Everybody was really happy. And I looked at the 4 attorneys who were handling that case, and I thought to myself, I don't know what it is that they do, but I want to do that. And it turns out that what they do is product liability and personal injury. So that's kind of how my passion for it developed. And then when I became an attorney and started working at Bree Law, I got to work with Josh, and Josh's entire practice is focused on personal injury. So he's been able to teach me a lot, and kind of just been riding his coattails to a certain extent. But I really love the practice. I love helping people, and I love the ability to work with Josh and all the great attorneys we have here at Bree Law.
Josh, how about you? What led you to the world of law and specifically personal injury?
Zach, thank you. That was a heartwarming part of the answer there. I love working with you too, man. I grew up in Central Illinois, and after undergrad, I worked in the legislature for a year. And it seemed that everyone who was doing the kind of stuff I wanted to be doing had a law degree. And it kind of helped solidify my decision to go to law school. And then I worked in DC for a few years with a big firm, and moved back home. And not too long after moving back home, I was injured in a car accident. One of the first injury cases I ever handled for a plaintiff, one of the first injury cases I handled was my own. And even as a lawyer who'd been practicing for several years, it was confusing. It was hard. I was just sure that the insurance company wasn't looking out for my best interest. And after kind of having to navigate that on my own, I had a few friends and other clients who had claims. And I just found it really rewarding to help people through a tough chapter of their life. And, in some cases, we're able to recover money to send a kid to college, or like a life-changing amount of money for people who really had something taken from them. And I find that really rewarding.
Oh, Josh, I did not know I knew that about you, like that about the car accident. I'm trying to remember from our first conversation when I met. I think I'd forgotten about your history on working on Capitol Hill. I too have a similar, experience working for a Texas congressman at the time, and everybody in Washington D.C. has a law degree, and for the first time in my life, I learned more about law and policy from that angle. So, guys, tell me about the world of personal injury as it applies to farmers and ranchers specifically. And why don't we just delve in first to talking about motorist coverage? I think that this is a confusing area for farmers on what they need or what they don't need. I think a fear that a lot of business owners have in general is that they're going to be overinsured, right? There's like a fine line there. And so tell me about this issue from your guys' perspective.
Yeah, a lot of our farm clients are cautious, frugal people, and they don't want to pay for a bunch of coverage they don't need. But we don't want to see farmers be like a victim of their own frugality when it comes to underinsured and uninsured motorist coverage. So one of the things that we try to educate our clients on, and really our colleagues, our friends, our family, is the importance of uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage, which is one of the coverages on your auto policy. And what we tell folks is it is the most important coverage for you and your family to make sure that your medical bills are paid, that if you have lost wages, that's covered. And if you were to look at your own insurance declarations, when you renew each year, they'll send you a sheet showing all your different coverages. The one I think you really want to pay super close attention to, apart from your liability coverage, is it's often abbreviated UM, and it'll be two numbers. So in Illinois, the lowest coverage allowable is 25. So it may be 2550, 50, 100, 100, 300, 250, 500. The first number is the coverage per person. The second is per occurrence. So if your whole family's in the car and you have 100, 300, the most the carrier is ever going to pay out would be 300, or the most for any one person is 100. So this is important because you can't really control, like if you're in an accident, what kind of coverage the driver that hits you might have. A lot of our cases, in Decatur that are most severe are people with no insurance at all. Like in some counties, if you're at a four-way stop sign, one of the vehicles may have no insurance, one may have the minimum coverage allowable by law. So all you can do to really protect your family is have really good underinsured and uninsured limits. I want to give an example from a past case that I think is especially relevant to family farmers. I represented this just wonderful, hardworking, salt of the earth guy who over like 30 years had built a commercial landscaping business. He was really a one-man show though. And he did all the work for all of his customers, loved what he did. Kind of guy that if he wakes up and he can't work, he's just extraordinarily restless, like a lot of our farm clients. And unfortunately, he was driving to, I think, a bank to mow their property, and a lady pulled out right in front of him. And he had to make a decision about, if he would have hit her going like 60 miles an hour with all of his equipment, that may have killed her. So he saved her life and was able to avoid hitting her and went into a culvert, but he was seriously injured. And fortunately, in his case, he had a lot of uninsured and underinsured coverage because she had the minimum limits allowable by law. And that gentleman wasn't able to work for a long time, but we were able to get a great recovery for him. But the really important thing that we found for him, if he wasn't able to work in his business, he was at risk of losing his business because the customers he built up over that 30 years of care, if he couldn't like mow for them, they were going to hire another company. So he, in addition to his own medical bills and losing his own income, he also had to go out of pocket to hire someone else to do his work for him to save his business. And I think for especially smaller farming operations, where if you lose one key worker, it's going to create a huge problem. You have to have that extra layer of coverage to kind of be able to replace yourself for some amount of time and replace your wages. So I hope if any of your farm clients are listening to this, they'll take a look and talk to their insurance person about their underinsured coverage. If they ever just want to ask a lawyer to look at it and explain what their declarations mean, Zach and I, we're always happy to do that. but that's also a great question for their insurance agent.
It's funny. Last week, I sprained my knee. So it wasn't my best moment, but I was reminded about how, like, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And I fortunately have a profession where I could work from home, be on Zoom, do Zoom mediation, Zoom court from, my house while I'm, tending to my knee. But farmers are not in the same position, right? Like, they can't just be at home. I mean, cows need to be fed. There's real work that needs to be done, physical labor. And so I think you bring up some good examples with that, Josh. I'm going to press you though, because I feel personally confused sometimes on not just like those per person or per claim, but like how much. Are there some general rules that people have, or is this a conversation with their insurance agent on what that sweet spot is for their insurance coverage?
You mean in terms of their limits?
Yeah, in terms of their limits.
Yeah, well, I mean, even the years I've been doing personal injury work, we've seen like hospital bills and physical therapy bills just shoot up quite a bit. So I would generally advise most of my friends and family that they should try to carry uninsured limits of at least $250,000 per person, because in a couple of weeks you can be at a place where you've got $200,000 of medical bills, and sometimes there's language in your health insurance contract that may either create delays, or they may not want to pay if there's some other party at fault. And when you put on, if someone is a high wage earner on top of that, and they have to protect their income, or like if they're self-employed and they may have to hire someone to do their job, that's a reason they should carry even higher coverages. I personally use country companies for my insurance. And I carry underinsured limits of $1 million, just because I see how quickly medical bills can rise, can add up, and for income replacement reasons too. So I would carry as much as you can. It's relatively low cost, high value coverage. So going from 100 to 250, it may be like $40 a year, maybe $100 a year. But when you consider that for a whole lot of people, the most likely thing to take them out of the game is some distracted driver blowing a stop sign. I would carry as much UIM as your carrier will allow, because it's such affordable coverage.
So Zach, to shift gears, can you talk to me a little bit about like the insurance companies themselves, and who the other side is, who the insurance company can make a difference in the coverage?
Insurance companies can make a huge difference in terms of coverage and how they treat you, or how they treat somebody who you have inadvertently injured, right? And so when selecting, and I'm not an insurance agent, I'm not going to pretend to be either, and I'm not going to try to steer anybody in any sort of direction, but whenever I am going to work with somebody, or whenever I am, buying something that I may need to rely on, I always try to take a values-based approach when looking at those sort of companies. And so, when selecting insurance, I think it's important to do just that, and to find a company that you're comfortable with, and that will treat you fair, and will be decent. And so what I found in my practice, and Josh alluded to this a second ago, Josh said that he has insurance through Country Financial. Whenever I became a lawyer and I started working on personal injury cases with Josh, I found that Country really adhered to those values. They were fair with my clients, and I just always found them to be very fair and decent. So I actually switched my insurance to Country as well, and I've been very happy with them. But again, I think it's you need to look at your own situation. You need to talk to a couple of different insurance companies and see who you're most comfortable with. I know there was an episode that I had watched on your podcast when we were preparing for our first our first time on here, and that was a podcast with two insurance agents whose whose names I can no longer recall, but hopefully Josh or Carrie would be able to help with that. And I think one of them was a country financial agent. Another may have been an independent agent. So, I think just talking to insurance agents and seeing which company and which agent really shares your values is what you need to look at when you're considering buying insurance.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And that was episode 48 for those of you that are listening with Derek Hayden from my hometown, Shelbyville, Shelbyville Insurance, and also Andrew Dietrich with Country Financial. And this is not a commercial for Country Financial, as well. But I too have insurance through Country and also with Derek Hayden there for the Shelbyville office. But I'm going to press you guys a little bit on this question, because the problem is when somebody is signing up for insurance, it's very difficult for them to know that when things hit the fan and they need that insurance company to come through for them, right? Like, are they going to do that? Or are they going to treat the person who's injured fairly? How can a layperson, how can a farmer or rancher investigate that for any kind of a cross comparison here?
You mentioned Derek, a guy like Derek, who's an independent agent with some experience, who can talk about like what experience their clients have had in the past with different carriers can make a big difference. Talking to your kind of hometown lawyer about their experiences can help too. But you make an excellent point. These companies spend enormous amounts of money advertising, claiming they'll be like a good neighbor, that you're in good hands. Mm-hmm. And often the claims are not, are totally without merit. One of the major carriers that we deal with a lot now has a claims practice where you almost have to sue their insured to get the case reassigned to get a fair offer. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me like just an institutional practice of bad faith to their clients. But I think that's one of the benefits of using an independent adjuster and making it clear that you're making your decision on value, not just on cost, because often the lowest cost carrier is also the lowest quality. And for just a slight difference in cost, you can have a lot better coverage and a much better experience if your family ever has a claim and needs their company to be there for them.
So let's say one of our listeners is like, you know what? I really need to talk to a personal injury attorney, like XYZ happened. What would be the tips that you would have for that particular listener who is, for lack of a better word, shopping for a personal injury attorney?
I think I'll break that into two quick parts, Carrie. The first of the reasons I think they're doing the right thing to look for an injury lawyer. Nationwide, people who hire an injury lawyer probably recover about 3 times as much. Now, every case is different. But yes, lawyers who do this kind of work charge a % of what they recover, but they make the pie a lot bigger because they know how to value claims. Second, injury lawyers tend to save their clients a lot of money on medical bills and liens by negotiating reductions, making sure the different coverages are applied optimally. And third, injury lawyers make the process so much easier, so their clients can focus on their health and getting their life back. But if you're trying to decide if they want an injury lawyer or not, if they've already reached that decision, a few tips that I can share. You want to find a lawyer who really focuses their practice on injury law, or that's one of either the one thing they do or one of 2 or 3 things they do. Because if a lawyer doesn't practice primarily in that area, there are issues they could fail to spot. There are additional layers of coverage that they could miss. And missing a defendant or a layer of coverage can make a huge difference. And that's just a lot more likely to happen if you have a lawyer who's a generalist who dabbles in injury law. They may not know of a theory of recovery or a source of insurance coverage that can make a big difference. Also, you want to look at their track record. Like, what you should ask, like, what other cases have you handled like mine? And see if they have a good answer. If they haven't handled any cases like yours before, it may not be a great idea. Often you can look up lawyers by their reviews. A lot of lawyers post past results in their marketing materials. And a couple other final tips. If you're in a state where this is possible, it's a good idea to make sure your lawyer has malpractice coverage. and that they don't have a prior significant history of discipline. In Illinois, where we all practice, you can look that up and see if someone has malpractice insurance or not, see if they have a discipline history or not. In some states, you can't. But if it's possible to know if your lawyer has malpractice insurance, you want to know, because if a lawyer makes a mistake, like they blow a statute of limitations, which even a good lawyer can make a mistake, you can be out of luck if there isn't any coverage to recover from. Another thing that a person may want to do is just talk to a lawyer they trust. Like if they have a lawyer for their farm, for their estate, for their business, they can usually refer them to an injury lawyer. A lot of our cases come from referrals from other lawyers. So if from a lay perspective, looking at a lot of lawyer ads, it's hard to know who to trust. But if you talk to a lawyer you trust and find out who they would call if their family member were injured, that can go a long way in helping you make a good choice.
So I'm bar licensed in more states than I can even count right now, more than that in one hand. And I can tell you that Illinois, surprisingly, in a good way, requires every year that I indicate my malpractice insurance. But most of the other states I'm licensed in don't require that information. So it is good that that information is available to people in the state of Illinois. And I'm curious to piggyback on this initial question for the both of you, like when should a person reach out to a personal injury lawyer? Should they wait until there is an issue? Should they start having these conversations preemptively? Like maybe I'm a business owner, I'm a farmer, I want to be able to have that relationship with a personal injury lawyer just in case ahead of time. When is the appropriate time for that initial reach out to be?
Zach, you want to field that or?
Yeah, from my perspective, and Josh, feel free to chime in if you disagree or have a different opinion, whatever. But I personally am always willing to meet with people, regardless of whether they're injured or not. So, I just like meeting and talking to people, especially farmers. They always have good stories and are generally really fun to interact with. So, I would never hesitate to reach out to an attorney. Planning in business is always very important. And so, as fun as it sometimes is not to plan for bad things to happen, as we know, bad things do happen, and it's great to be prepared when that happens. So I would certainly consider, having some semblance of relationship, at least with an attorney who you trust and who you can reach out to if tragedy strikes.
Yeah, I personally, I don't do personal injury law, but I agree with you, Zach, when I go and I speak to farmers and things, I encourage, farmers and agribusiness owners to develop these professional relationships, whether or not it's with an attorney or with other kinds of professionals before the issue arises. I don't like getting calls when there's an emergency and I don't have any go ahead and call me. I'm not saying don't call me, but it is not my favorite time to be an attorney in the middle of an emergency when I've had no opportunity to have prior conversations with you for any kind of preventative measures or anything like that. And, I think that, nobody's called from jail, but I think as farmers and business owners need to know who they are calling when XYZ issue, comes up. And so I think it's always better from a business owner's perspective or a farmer or rancher to have those relationships ahead of time. And, I agree with you, Josh. I think that, as a legal professional, I want my clients to come to me for referrals. And so I think that I'm asking an attorney for a good referral for a personal injury lawyer is a nice starting place there. What are some additional considerations for family farms in terms of insurance? Specifically, sometimes I get questions as it applies to disability insurance, long-term care, and life insurance. And I was wondering what you guys felt on how those three insurance instruments worked into the package for farmers and ranchers.
Yeah. Again, I'm not an insurance agent, so an insurance agent such as Derek, who you referenced earlier, could probably talk about those three types of coverages much more intelligently than I can. But with respect to disability insurance, especially treating it as some sort of an income replacement, if something were to tragically happen, I highly encourage anybody to look into that. I've had firsthand experience with a family member who's gone through something unexpected and tragic, and necessitated the use of disability insurance, and that was in many ways a lifesaver. So I strongly encourage anybody to look into that and see what may be right for your situation. A second type of insurance that's available is long-term care insurance coverage. I actually wrote about this when I was a student at the U of I. I was on the Elder Law Journal, and I wrote my article that got published for about long-term care financing and the coming crisis that our society is going to encounter, because we have so many baby boomers and folks who are getting to the age where the odds of needing long-term care are substantially increasing, and they may not have the assets or the resources to pay for that. So long-term care coverage is something that I highly encourage anybody to look into, regardless of age, as it's something that you may inevitably need. The third type of insurance I think you would reference is life insurance. Mm-hmm. I know there are many different types of life insurance, and it seems like every insurance agent and lawyer that I talk to has a different theory on how life insurance may work best. So again, I highly encourage you to look into life insurance and to talk to an insurance adjuster about how the various forms of life insurance coverage available may be beneficial in for your particular situation.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about like farmers and ranchers with disability insurance, because, it's, they're so dependent on their physical health, so I've actually done prenuptial agreements involving surgeons. And, if you're marrying a surgeon, you might want to negotiate disability insurance into the prenuptial agreement, because, if a surgeon has a hand injury, it can be very detrimental to their career. But, similarly with a farmer or rancher, I mean, what are you going to do if tragedy hits? So I think that could be an important consideration. I don't know what you guys think about long-term care insurance, but I think it's fantastic. Unfortunately, I feel like it's a little harder to come by nowadays, and a little bit more expensive there. So I think that those are some great considerations for farmers to consider. So what are your guys' thoughts on the limits when it comes to commercial insurance policies for the farm, in terms of like maybe property insurance and things like that?
Yeah, so as we know, agriculture there are a lot of injuries in agriculture. You just alluded to that. And that's one of the reasons why disability insurance is so, in my opinion, is perhaps necessary, because you're right. If a farmer breaks their leg or can't get into a tractor to plant or to harvest, it's going to really affect their bottom line. Similarly, just as I would recommend, high coverage for income replacement in the event something like that happens, I'd recommend very high limits on a commercial policy. Farmers and farm workers are frequently injured, as I've alluded to, but they also cause injuries as well. Grain trucks, for example, there are many people each year that are hit by grain trucks, and so tragedy, when tragedy strikes, you want to make sure that you're covered, and you want to make sure that your personal assets aren't at stake. So I'd highly recommend, again, talking to an insurance agent, determining what type of coverage is best for your situation, and don't try to save a few dollars each month by obtaining the limits. I'd get very high limits and make sure you're well covered and well protected.
So I've historically told clients, although I think now I need to increase my rule, that they should minimally have enough property insurance to cover the fair market value of the property. Is that an accurate rule of thumb, or would you, Josh, add in more for potential medical there? I mean, what would be, and of course, our listeners need to talk to an insurance agent about their specific situation, but is there some kind of rule of thumb that exists when it comes to property insurance?
I think the rule that you've used is a good kind of baseline. I would want to have at least as much coverage as the asset for, I mean, if someone has a huge operation, they don't probably need, like $40 million limits or anything, but they should carry substantial limits. Because you have to keep in mind, if your insurance limits aren't adequate, you're putting your entire farm operation in jeopardy. So the thing about agricultural injuries is they're often really serious. I mean, when people are using heavy equipment, and sometimes they have younger folks working in their farming operations, you can have a lifetime of disability, which can create claims with values into the several millions of dollars. So unfortunately, I mean, I think we should talk about like what can happen if your limits aren't high enough. As a lawyer, if I represent a seriously injured person, and this may not make me the most popular guy with your viewers, but I would look at it like it's not my client's fault that the farm operation didn't carry enough insurance. Mm-hmm. And lawyers who have to pursue their client's best interest, if their client's going to need a lifetime of medical care, they may have no reasonable choice but to pursue the recovery of those assets and force the sale of farmland or equipment to try to get some kind of justice for what was taken from their injured clients. So you want to both make sure that you have a high quality insurance carrier, because if you have a low quality insurance carrier, you can get into a situation where a lawyer sues to try to set up like a bad faith claim and may get a judgment in excess of your policy limits, and then your assets are on the line. So that's one of the most important reasons to make sure you have enough coverage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Zach, can you tell me a little bit about how workman's compensation insurance works into this whole like insurance puzzle?
Yeah, so in Illinois, most employers are required to maintain workers' compensation insurance. So here at our office, we have workers' compensation insurance for our employees if somebody were to get injured. Hopefully nobody ever gets injured working in our law firm, but I guess sometimes things can get a little dangerous. But there is an Illinois exception that applies to agriculture. Specifically, if the enterprise employs less than 400 working days of agricultural labor per quarter, then there's an exception and there's not a requirement to maintain workers' compensation insurance. That being said, if the operation exceeds that 400-hour threshold, then it may be in the best interest of your client or your farmer to purchase insurance, workers' compensation insurance anyway. And again, this goes back to me not being an insurance agent. You want to talk to an insurance agent to determine your best, determine what's right for you and your situation. But I think that there's a general thought in agriculture that that workers' compensation insurance is not required, and so there's no point in ever obtaining it. When in all actuality, while that's true for the most part, it's not always true. So certainly would want to make sure to determine whether you want to obtain it or to determine whether your situation may require it or it may be helpful.
Yeah, I have so many things going through my head right now because I know a lot of farms, also might be paying people as independent contractors when probably they should be paying people as W-2 employees. And so I just think it's so important for farmers and ranchers to speak with an attorney who's helping them think through all these different legal issues. And I kind of forgot about the 400 working day rule with workman's comp. So thank you, Zach, for that reminder. So let's shift gears and talk a little bit about grain truck accidents. I think that Josh had alluded to that potential earlier in our conversation. What are some ways that farmers can reduce the risks with these grain truck accidents?
Yeah, unfortunately, we've handled several grain truck cases in the past. I have a pretty significant one I'm working on right now, and then a part of it, growing up on a farm, being part of a family farm, lots of friends that do this kind of work. I think often people driving grain trucks they're just a number of kind of things that sort of come together to create some risk. Sometimes it's younger, less experienced drivers that are operating grain trucks, and the stopping distance is just wildly different than a car. And for a younger, less experienced driver, especially if they're driving distracted at all, or if they're the other kind of issue that can make grain trucks dangerous is at harvest, people are working crazy hours. So when you're working really long shifts, you're going to have more fatigue. And driving when you're very fatigued is much like driving intoxicated. And you combine that with driving equipment that you're not used to driving, and it can lead to some really dangerous outcomes. There are steps farmers can take to avoid claims for injuries related to grain truck accidents. One is just being very careful about the background of your drivers. Like, do a background check if you have an employee. Because if we have a client that was injured in a trucking accident, and we see that this person has a bunch of traffic tickets for blowing stop signs, driving in really recklessly, I think we can make a pretty compelling case that the farm operation should have never trusted certain drivers to drive grain trucks. So one type of claim you have to be on the lookout for is like a negligent hiring, negligent entrustment type of claim. Another issue, if there is a grain truck accident and it's serious, or there's a serious disability or death, the lawyers for the injured person will hire a trucking expert to go over every aspect of that truck to see if they can make a negligent maintenance claim. So if the brakes are out of service, or if there are any other problems with the truck, that independently, even if the driver didn't really do anything wrong, but if the brakes were shot, or if that can be the basis of a negligence claim. So I think, making sure that you background check your drivers, that you really spend time with any younger drivers to make sure that they're not driving distracted, that they're well trained, and being very cautious and even defensive in your maintenance of your vehicles.
Josh, can I add one thing onto that? That you really made me think of when you use the word young. I've never encountered this as a lawyer, but I know that it happens because it's happened to me when I was growing up. And that's when you not often, I've seen situations where farmers will allow, especially during harvest season when they need all hands on deck, they'll allow kids who do not have their driver's license to operate grain trucks and heavy equipment on roads. And I would caution against that very much. Not only is that dangerous for anybody that they may encounter on the road because they don't have the proper training or their license, it can also void your insurance coverage in the event that something were to happen. So that's something I would certainly caution against doing. Again, with the caveat that I have been in that situation. I've driven trucks before I was 16. So I know that it happens, but I'd be very, very, very careful.
Yeah, that's a good point, Zach. I know that farms can use children for assistance during, different parts of the growing and the harvest season. So that's good to keep in mind. Talk to me about tractor rollovers. What should farmers be thinking about in terms of that particular issue?
Well, I think now certainly most modern tractors have rollover protection, but one of the really jarring statistics in our research on farm injuries is a lot of deaths and just terrible family tragedies can occur if there's a rollover. It might not even be like a massive piece of farm equipment. We had I had a kind of a distant relative who was killed when a large lawnmower rolled over, and terrible situation. So it's a good idea to invest in rollover like roll bars and kind of protective equipment if your farm ground has kind of terrain that can create any kind of a rollover risk, and to just always err on the side of extreme caution if you're in like an older tractor that doesn't have that kind of protection.
What about ATVs, which are very popular with, farms, particularly in the Midwest? So what are your thoughts on how farmers should help mitigate risk there?
I think we've just in Central Illinois. I'll bet Zach and I both can think of 3 or 4 cases just off at the top of our mind of terrible tragedies involving ATVs. I've had a few clients involved in them. It's often, look, I know they're fun. I've liked riding them myself, but you should really use caution about letting children ride powerful ATVs around your farm where the terrain is unpredictable. They're not using helmets typically. I saw a statistic that like youth under 16 is 12 times as likely to be injured in an ATV when compared to an adult. And they don't have it when there's a lack of experience and maybe a feeling of invincibility, a lack of consequences, and everything can change for a family. I mean, it can be such a devastating loss. Like, I know of a family in Clinton that lost a child who was a passenger in an ATV where there was just some grass and they didn't see. I think it was like a fence post that was kind of obscured, and the child was thrown from the ATV. It just really, I don't think it's worth the risk. Like if I had a pretty large farming operation, I wouldn't want minors on ATVs. I know that it might be fun. I might seem like I'm hyper cautious, but it's just too great of a risk. And almost half of farm injuries that are really serious are to minors. So I would just urge people to keep your kids off the ATVs. It just isn't worth the risk.
I crashed an ATV whenever I was like 14. Drove right into a tree.
Oh man.
Yeah. So, I just didn't know what I was doing. So I certainly just agree with everything Josh said.
Wow, Zach, I didn't know we'd have that personal of an example.
Actually, it was good that the tree was there because I was aiming for a creek and the tree stopped me from going in the creeks.
This is such an important issue for farmers. I mean, it's one of those things where people don't like to think about it, but it's a very real risk in agriculture production. I mean, even my own farm family has had some people that have been seriously injured on the farm. So it can happen, and I think that thinking about insurance and mitigation risk and getting yourself in the hands of the right personal injury attorney, should that need exist, is really important. So I want to thank both of you for taking the time to speak about this issue to our listeners. Can each of you, we'll start with Josh, and then go to Zach, tell me your contact information. How can our listeners find you should they want to touch base?
Yeah, my email is josh@brelaw, BRELAW.com. That's usually the best way to reach me, or you can call our law firm, Bull & Robinson and Ellis. And I'm happy to talk to any of your listeners who have any questions.
I'm also happy to speak with anybody or correspond with anybody that has any questions. The easiest way to reach me is also by email. My email address is zanderson, ZANDERSON @brelaw.com, BRELAW.com. I guess I need to change my email just to only have my first name. I didn't realize you did that, Josh.
Like the cool kids.
Yeah. Do you have that? I need to get that. I didn't know that was a thing. But yeah, I'm happy to talk to anybody who has any questions or, yeah.
Well, until next time, thank you to both of you.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you very much, Carrie.